the black waitress saw her long-lost mother's picture in the billionaire's phone. What happens next? What if the photo on a stranger's phone could unlock the deepest mystery of your heart? 34-year-old Camille Washington had been wiping down tables at Henderson's Diner for the past 8 years, watching countless faces come and go through those glass doors. Each morning, she'd tie her apron with the same quiet hope that maybe today would be different. Maybe today she'd finally find the answer to the question that had haunted her since she was 7 years old. Where was her mother? The dinner rush had just begun when he walked in. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Camille made in 3 months. At 42, James Whitmore carried himself with the confidence of a man who owned half the city, which he practically did. But as he settled into booth 7 and pulled out his phone to check messages, neither he nor Camille could have imagined that one glimpse of his screen would shatter everything they thought they knew about family, loss, and the threads that connect our hearts across impossible distances. Where are you watching from tonight? Camille had learned to read people the way others read newspapers, quickly and with practiced accuracy. In 8 years of serving coffee and hope in equal measure, she developed an instinct about her customers. The truckers who needed extra kindness, the teenagers on first dates who required gentle encouragement, and the businesspeople who just wanted efficiency without small talk. James Whitmore fell into that last category, or so she thought. He ordered black coffee and the evening special without looking up from his phone, fingers dancing across the screen with the urgency of a man whose time was worth more than most people's annual salaries. His voice carried that particular weariness that came from too many meetings and not enough sleep. "Will that be all, sir?" Camille asked, balancing the coffee pot with the grace of someone who'd mastered the art of serving others while staying invisible. "Actually," James paused, finally raising his eyes to meet hers. Something in his expression shifted, as if he was seeing her for the first time rather than simply acknowledging another service worker. "You remind me of someone." Camille felt heat creep up her neck. She'd heard variations of this line before, and it never led anywhere good. "I get that a lot. People say I have one of those faces." But James wasn't flirting. His brow furrowed with genuine puzzlement, and he tilted his phone screen slightly as if comparing something. "No, it's more than that. You have her eyes. The same amber color with those little gold flecks." Before Camille could respond, a crash from the kitchen interrupted them. By the time she'd helped clean up the dropped plates and returned to refill his coffee, James had tucked his phone away. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just slipped through her fingers. The evening wore on with its usual rhythm. James worked quietly on his laptop, occasionally taking calls in hushed tones about acquisitions and board meetings. Camille found herself stealing glances at him, trying to decode the mystery behind his earlier words. Who did she remind him of? Why had he looked at his phone with such intensity? During her break, she sat in the small employee area behind the kitchen, pressing her palms against her tired eyes. At 7 years old, when the social worker had told her that her mother was gone and wouldn't be coming back, Camille had created elaborate fantasies about their eventual reunion. She'd imagined her mother was a secret agent, or a doctor saving lives in remote corners of the world, or maybe just someone who'd gotten lost and couldn't find her way home. Now, at 34, those childhood dreams felt foolish. Her mother was probably just another woman who couldn't handle being a parent, another casualty of circumstances Camille would never understand. She'd built a life around that absence, steady work, a small apartment, a cat named Hope who seemed to understand the weight of solitude. But something about James Whitmore's words had cracked open that old wound, and suddenly all those carefully buried questions were rising to the surface like air bubbles in deep water. When she returned to the dining room, booth 7 was empty except for a generous tip and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. 3 days passed before James returned, and when he did, Camille's hands trembled slightly as she poured his coffee. She'd spent those 72 hours replaying their brief conversation, wondering if she'd imagined the strange recognition in his eyes. "The usual?" she asked, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Please." James looked tired, more so than before. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect shirt was slightly wrinkled. "Actually, Camille, that is your name, isn't it?" I saw it on your tag the other day. She nodded, surprised he'd remembered. I owe you an explanation. My comment about your eyes, that was unprofessional of me. It's just. He ran a hand through his silver hair. You bear a remarkable resemblance to someone I used to know. Camille's pulse quickened. Someone you used to know? James hesitated, then slowly retrieved his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen for a long moment before he turned it toward her. Her name was Diane. Diane Washington. The coffee pot slipped from Camille's nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a crash that seemed to echo through the entire diner. Hot coffee splashed across her shoes, but she barely noticed. Because there, on James Whitmore's phone, was a photograph of her mother. Not the faded, creased picture Camille kept hidden in her jewelry box. The only physical memory she had of the woman who'd disappeared from her life. This was a recent photo, maybe a year or two old at most. Her mother's hair was shorter, streaked with silver, and she wore an elegant blue dress that spoke of a life far removed from the poverty they'd once shared. But those amber eyes with their gold flecks, those were unmistakably the same eyes Camille saw in the mirror every morning. Where? Camille's voice came out as barely a whisper. Where did you get this picture? James was already standing, reaching for napkins to clean up the spilled coffee, but his movements were mechanical, distracted. Diane works for my company. Has for about 15 years now. She's my chief financial officer. The world tilted sideways. Camille gripped the edge of the table, her legs suddenly unsteady. Her mother wasn't lost or dead or suffering somewhere. She was alive, successful, working for one of the city's most prominent businessmen. And she'd been less than 5 miles away for 15 years while Camille had aged out of foster care, worked 3 jobs to put herself through community college, and built a life from the scraps of abandonment. I need to sit down, Camille managed. James guided her to the empty booth across from his own, his businessman's composure cracking as he watched the color drain from her face. You're her daughter, aren't you? The one she abandoned, Camille finished bitterly. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. The dinner rush was beginning, but the world beyond their booth seemed muted, unreal. Camille stared at the phone screen, memorizing every detail of her mother's face. Diane looked happy, confident, nothing like the broken young woman who'd kissed 7-year-old Camille goodbye one Tuesday morning and never came home. She never mentioned having a daughter, James said quietly, and those 6 words hit Camille like physical blows. The truth hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. Her mother had erased her, built an entire successful life while pretending that the little girl she'd left behind had never existed. Camille felt something hollow and cold expanding in her chest, crowding out her ability to breathe properly. I'm sorry, James said, and she could hear the genuine regret in his voice. I shouldn't have shown you that. I thought maybe. I don't know what I thought. Camille wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, angry at the tears she couldn't control. No, I'm glad you did. I've spent 27 years wondering if she was dead or alive, if she ever thought about me, if something terrible had happened to prevent her from coming back. She laughed, but it came out sharp and broken. Turns out she just didn't want to remember me. James leaned forward, his expression troubled. Diane never talked about her past, but I always sensed she was carrying something heavy. There's a sadness in her sometimes, especially around Mother's Day or Christmas. She works longer hours during those times, like she's trying to outrun something. Maybe she feels guilty, Camille said, but even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure she believed them. If Diane felt guilty, wouldn't she have tried to find her? Wouldn't she have at least checked to see if her daughter was alive and well? The dinner crowd was getting restless, shooting pointed looks at the waitress who was sitting down on the job. Camille started to stand, but James caught her wrist gently. Wait. There's something else. He scrolled through his phone again, stopping at what looked like a company directory. She goes by Diane Matthews now. She's been married for about 12 years to a man named Robert Matthews. They have. He paused, his expression pained. They have 2 children. Twin boys, about 14 years old. The words hit her like ice water. Her mother had replaced her. Not only had Diane built a new life, but she'd also built a new family. 2 sons who got to grow up with the mother Camille had lost. 2 boys who probably had no idea they had an older sister who'd spent her childhood wondering why she wasn't worth staying for. "I can't do this," Camille whispered, finally standing on shaky legs. "I need to get back to work." But James stood too, pulling out his business card. "Camille, wait. If you want to see her, to talk to her, I could arrange a meeting. Privately, away from the office. Maybe there's more to the story than either of us understands." Camille stared at the card, her hand trembling as she took it. Part of her wanted to tear it into pieces, to forget this conversation had ever happened. But another part, the 7-year-old who'd waited by the window every night for 3 years, whispered that she needed to know why. "Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments." "I'll think about it," she managed, tucking the card into her apron pocket where it seemed to burn against her hip like a brand. James nodded, leaving money on the table for his untouched meal. "Whatever you decide, Camille, you deserve answers." But as she watched him leave, Camille wondered if some answers were too painful to bear. For 2 weeks, James Whitmore's business card lived in Camille's apron pocket like a loaded gun she was afraid to touch. She carried it through every shift, feeling its weight during the quiet moments between customers. At night, she'd hold it under her lamp, staring at the phone number that could bridge 27 years of silence with a single call. Finally, on a rainy Thursday morning when the diner was nearly empty, she dialed the number with shaking fingers. "Mr. Whitmore? It's Camille. From Henderson's Diner." Her voice sounded small even to her own ears. "Camille." James's relief was audible. "I've been hoping you'd call. How are you holding up?" "I need to see her," Camille said, the words rushing out before she could lose her nerve. "But I can't just show up at your office. If she really doesn't remember having a daughter, or if she's hidden it from her family." "I understand. Let me think." There was a long pause. "There's a charity gala this Saturday night at the Riverside Hotel. Diane will be there. She handles the foundation's finances. It's a public event, lots of people. You could observe her from a distance, decide if you want to approach her." Camille closed her eyes. "I don't have anything to wear to a charity gala." "Leave that to me," James said gently. Saturday evening arrived gray and drizzling, matching Camille's mood as she stood outside the Riverside Hotel in a borrowed black dress that James had somehow arranged to have delivered to her apartment. She'd never felt more out of place, watching elegantly dressed couples emerge from expensive cars while she clutched a bus transfer in her sweaty palm. The ballroom was a sea of sparkling dresses and confident laughter. Camille accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and positioned herself near the silent auction tables where she could scan the crowd without drawing attention. And then she saw her. Diane Matthews stood near the orchestra, engaged in animated conversation with a tall man in a navy suit who must have been her husband. She looked exactly like the photo on James's phone, but seeing her in person was different, overwhelming. This was her mother, alive and vibrant and completely unaware that her abandoned daughter was watching from across the room. Camille took a step forward, then another. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she closed the distance, weaving between clusters of donors and board members. 20 feet. 15. 10. Diane turned, perhaps sensing someone's gaze, and her amber eyes, those identical amber eyes, met Camille's across the crowded room. The recognition was instant and devastating. Diane's face, then Diane whispered one word that carried across the noise of the party. "Camille." The world around them seemed to fade as Diane took trembling steps toward her daughter. Her husband called her name, confused, but she didn't seem to hear him. Nothing existed except this moment, this impossible reunion that both women had dreamed of and dreaded in equal measure. "My God," Diane breathed, stopping just arm's length away. "You look exactly like..." Her voice broke. "Like me, when I was your age." Camille's carefully rehearsed words, all the questions and accusations she'd planned, dissolved on her tongue. Face to face with her mother after 27 years, all she could manage was, "Why?" Diane's eyes filled with tears. "I was 19, Camille. 19 and scared and so broke I couldn't afford groceries. When you got sick that winter, remember, you had pneumonia, I couldn't pay for the medicine. I was 3 months behind on rent, working 2 jobs that barely covered daycare." She wiped her cheeks with shaking hands. "I thought if I signed the papers, if I let you go to a family that could take care of you properly, you'd have a chance at the life I couldn't give you." "You signed away your parental rights?" The words came out as a whisper. "The social worker said you'd been placed with a wonderful family. She said you were happy, thriving. I made her promise never to tell you I'd given up voluntarily. I wanted you to think I'd died, or that something had happened to me. I couldn't bear the thought of you knowing I'd chosen to let you go." Camille felt the last 27 years rearranging themselves in her mind. "But I wasn't adopted. I spent 11 years in foster care." The color drained from Diane's face completely. "What? No, that's impossible. Mrs. Henderson assured me." "Mrs. Henderson? From Child Services?" "Yes, she handled the whole process. She said." Diane's legs seemed to give out, and she sank onto a nearby chair. "She said you'd be adopted within months. She showed me pictures of families who wanted you." A puzzle piece clicked into place in Camille's mind. "Henderson. That's the name of the diner where I work. The owner's mother used to work for the county." They stared at each other as the horrible truth settled between them. Diane had been lied to, manipulated by a social worker who had convinced a desperate teenage mother that abandonment was love. And Camille had spent her childhood believing she'd been thrown away when her mother had actually been trying to save her. "I looked for you," Diane whispered. "When I graduated from college, got my first real job, I tried to find you. But the records were sealed. Mrs. Henderson said it would be disruptive to your new life to reopen old wounds." Robert Matthews approached cautiously, having watched this reunion unfold from a respectful distance. When Diane introduced Camille as her daughter, his face showed surprise but not judgment. Their twin sons, now 14, accepted the news of an older sister with the adaptability of teenagers, though Camille suspected there would be many more conversations ahead. As the evening wound down, Diane pressed a piece of paper into Camille's hand, her address, phone number, and a note that simply said, "Please don't disappear again." Walking out of the hotel, Camille felt lighter than she had in years. She wasn't the unwanted child she'd believed herself to be. She was a daughter who'd been loved enough to let go, by a mother who'd spent 27 years grieving that choice. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey of love, loss, and the bonds that connect our hearts across time.